Hi everyone and welcome to a Reactor Sydney live stream. My name is Nadia. I'm the Community Engagement and Events Manager for the Reactor here in Sydney. Today's session is the Introduction to Azure DevOps. So we are joined with Deepak, who is a Microsoft MVP. So he'll be taking us through our session today. Just a few things before we do get started. The session will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. So I will pop that in the Q&A for you as well. And if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. And once Deepak's finished with his session, we will then answer them for you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Deepak. Thanks, Deepak.
Thank you, Nadia. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. And let me know once you're able to see it.
Yep, perfect. We can see your screen.
Awesome. All good. Am I good to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Sure. I will just make it full screen. All right. So good afternoon, good evening, everyone, based on where you are joined from. My name is Deepak. I'm an Azure MVP and NCD and working as Senior Architect with Insight based in Perth. If you have never been to Perth, this is how Perth looks like. So in the right, you've got the Kings Park, and in the left, you've got the city area, and in the bottom, you can see the beautiful white sand beaches. So this is how Perth looks like. So we're not going to talk about how Perth looks like. We're going to talk about Azure DevOps. So this is how the agenda looks like for today's discussion. So I'm going to talk about Azure DevOps, Azure Code, Repos, and Pipeline for CI and CD. And we're going to build infrastructure using Azure DevOps. Now, just mind it, DevOps is a very big topic. And I'm going to talk about a very specific scenario where you go to a website which you developed locally. And you want to just use that website and put it in Azure DevOps and create a CI/CD pipeline and deploy it in Azure. So that's the scenario I'm going to cover. So I'll keep on, jumping back and forth between the slides as well as the demos. So what is DevOps? So if you look at the DevOps official definition, so DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end user. Now, in an easy way, DevOps is a culture which implements technology in order to promote collaboration between dev and ops team to deploy code to production. So this basically helps any company to deploy code to production to provide values to their end user. Now, what is Azure DevOps? Now, Azure DevOps is Microsoft cloud-hosted DevOps service that work for any language targeting any platform. Now, in Azure DevOps, you can plan your project using agile tools in Azure boards, version your source code in Azure Repos, and build your test plan in Azure Test Plans, and deploy your solution through CI/CD pipeline using Azure Pipeline. So it's a combination of multiple technologies which works together to provide value to the end customer. Now, there are some customers who use different products instead of using Azure boards. That's perfectly all right. The different customers, we use different pipeline mechanisms like Jenkins. And for repos, people use GitHub, or you can use Azure repos as well. So with this, I'll talk about the first topic, which is Azure Board. Now, Azure Board allows you to create your project in an agile way. So this is pretty much when you have got an idea and you want to note down that idea in a piece of paper, and you want to prioritize which task you want to do. Now, in our example, we have an idea where we want to build a website. So probably there would be a series of steps we would want to write down. There would be a series of tasks we would want to write down. Now, that's something which can be written down in Azure Board. Now, I will give you a quick demo of how this Azure Board looks like, along with if you are using Azure DevOps for the first time, how do you get started? So with this, I'll quickly jump on my first demo. So if you are kind of new to DevOps, it's pretty much like you need to open dev.azure.com and it'll take you to this page where you can start as free. And we'll talk about the DevOps licensing in a few minutes. But in my environment, I already have got the DevOps licensing. And for 5 users team, it's always kind of free. So I will sign on to Azure DevOps. And I already have got few organizations and projects configured. But for this demo, my plan is to start from the scratch. So probably what I'll do, I'll create an organization, which is a organization for your project. And then you can create projects under the organization. So I will just give it a name. So maybe you want to create a set of projects for a company. You can create an organization, and then you can create projects under it. So maybe I will give it a name as Tech Talk Sydney Reactor. So Tech Talk is my website's name. That's what I use in most of the time because it has to be a unique name. Otherwise, if anybody else was already used this name, you won't be able to use it. So I generally try to use Tech Talk as a prefix. So I'll click on organization and I will wait for this organization to get created. So it's just creating it for me and my organization is created. And within this organization, I can create the project. So I will just refresh this organization. And I will give it a name. I'll give it a name as Sydney Reactor, and I can give a description for this project, which means why I'm using this project. And the one thing which I can do whenever I create a project, I can define what's going to be my version control. In my case, I'm going to use Git, and which work item process I want to use. So probably I'm going to use Agile. I can even use Basic, but I'll use Agile, and I'll start the project. Now I'll just go back. I don't know, this kind of error keeps coming. It creates a project, and you can see the project is created, and it's pretty empty. So there's nothing. It's kind of our first step to the Azure DevOps. Now, the first thing which I want to do is I want to put together my idea into a series of tasks, which I'll do it with boards. So I'll go on boards and I can start creating my work items. So I can write user stories and I can define what I want to do with my website. Now, I can create user stories or I can even import if I already have got my user stories created in a CSV or in Excel. Or probably I can even export it and reuse it if my user stories are pretty similar. So what I'll do is I'll go on work item and I will import my work item. So I'll choose a file and I'll show you in a second. So I've got the CSV file, which is pretty straightforward. Just got a couple of user stories, written in it, and I will try to import it. So you could see I have got a series of, user stories, which all looks good, and I can save it, and that pretty much, gives my board, or I would say, which fills up my board. Now, I could have hand typed it and created it, but just to give you, I can create my user stories in board, and I can track my project. So I can define the task within the stories. So maybe if I want to add task, maybe create a source code. Source code should be created in VS Code. Any task which needs to be done within that user story, I can write it down and I can keep adding tasks under that story. So that means I know when I need to perform this particular user story, I've got a series of tasks I need to perform. Now, once I'm done with it, I can track my project. And let's say if I finish this item, I can move it to active, which means I'm in an inactive phase of working on it. It's not in my backlog. Once it's resolved, I can move it to resolve. And this is how I can track it in my Kanban board. So this is pretty much like a Kanban board, which I can use in order to track my work items. So you could see I can create more work items if I need, and I can manage it within the boards. I can define my backlogs, and I can even plan it to run it in the sprint. So if I need to, target a specific set of work items in a sprint, maybe on a weekly or a monthly kind of a sprint, I can move them in a sprint. So I can create a sprint, I can define a time for the sprint, and once the sprint is created, I can move my worker items in the sprint. So that's pretty much I can do, and I can manage, things in Azure Code. So this kind of a quick introduction of, Azure Code. So that kind of gives you the understanding that how do you convert your idea into some sort of like, framework to align your project delivery. So I'll go back and I'll talk about the second agenda item, which is Azure Repos. Now, Azure Repos is a set of version control tool that you can use to manage your code. So Microsoft uses Git and PVPS, but in most of the cases, you would end up using Git, and you would have seen when I created a project, I used the Git as my version control system. Now, with Azure Repos, I can basically manage my code, and I can use it in my pipeline and deploy my code to the infrastructure. Now, I'll just go on demo and I'll show you how does that look like, because I already have got this project created. And if I come on repos, now, so what it says is that you can clone an existing repo, or you can just clone it in VS Code and you can get started. That's one option. Or if you already have a code and you want to use Git commands, you can use this Git command to upload your code to this repo. So I've got a code running on my laptop, and I will use some of these commands to upload my code to Azure Repos. So I'll go on my terminal window, and I will run command, see where I am. So I'll initialize my Git repository. So this is pretty much gonna start tracking all the changes which I'm making, and I can add all the changes and all the folders. Gonna commit it. So this is what I'm doing. I'm just committing. So Git allows me to have version control. It basically allows me to track any, any changes which I have made. So in this case, all the stuff is new, and that's all committed. And now it is ready, and I can basically add a remote origin. So what I'll do, I will jump back and I'll copy these commands. So maybe I will copy it in a notepad, so it's kind of easy for me to I'll copy this command and then I'm gonna push this code to the repo. So now it's gonna ask me for authentication. So I just need to sign in to the same account which I have used in order to create this DevOps project. So I'll select that one, and what it's gonna do, it's gonna push all of my code into the Azure repos. So if I just go back and look at files, I can see my code is uploaded here in the repo. So you could see I have got my code and I can use this code to create a build. So that's something which I'll do in a second. I'll hop back to my presentation and talk about, pipeline, because that's a topic which will take a little bit of time. And so what Azure pipelines do? So Azure pipeline is a fully featured CI/CD, pipeline or CI/CD service in Azure DevOps. Now, what is CI/CD? That's pretty much like continuous integration and continuous deployment. So what it allows you to do, you write a code and upload it in the Azure Repo. And if you want, you can continuously deploy that code in Azure or any cloud of your choice. Now, in our case, we're going to use Azure, but you can define any cloud you want to use, in your environment. Now, with these CI/CD pipelines, I can also deploy infrastructure as a code, which means if I want to build infrastructure in Azure, which I'll do in a moment, I'll deploy a web app from the scratch in Azure. And then I can even deploy my website code in my web app as well. So I can deploy the infrastructure, maybe the VNet, the governance, maybe the web apps or the Kubernetes cluster. So that's the infrastructure I can deploy. And then I can deploy the software on top of it. So that's something which can be done as well. Now, this is how the pipelines look like. So you could see I can define the pipeline. We have got the code which is used based on the build I have created. And then I can have different stages. So I can have a dev stage. I can have the product stage. Now, in our example, a plan is to create a dev and prod kind of a stage, which means we'll create a website that's going to go into a deployment slot. And then we can manually move it to the production. So that's pretty much what we're going to do. And with this, I will jump onto the demo. So here we have the pipelines, and we already have got our codes come in. Now, there are two types of pipeline. One is the build pipeline, and another one is the release pipeline. Now, what I'll do is I will basically use the release pipeline first because it uses the ARM template. I don't need to build anything. So I'm not building my software, so I don't need to create any build. I can directly use the release pipeline for my deployment. So my first pipeline will be there to deploy the Azure infrastructure. And in this case, it would be the Azure web app. Now, before I do that, I would need to connect my DevOps with my Azure environment. Now, for that, I'll go in my project settings and I'll use my service connection and I'll create a service connection. Now, what does service connection do? It basically allows you to connect your Azure DevOps with your choice of cloud. So if you've got AWS, you've got Azure, you've got Google, or if you want to deploy on-prem, you can use the service connection. In our case, we're going to use Azure Resource Manager. I'll use that. And I'm going to create it automatic. So it's going to use my login credential, or I can even create a service principal in Azure manually and provide those credentials, here. That's my second option. So it's going to use my login credentials. I'm going to look at my subscriptions, and then I can give a name to my service connection. Takes a little bit of time to refresh. So I'll kind of wait for a few more seconds. Okay, there you go. So it has detected my subscription. I can choose which subscription I want to use. So I've got multiple subscriptions. Probably I'm going to use the Visual Studio Enterprise. That's the subscription I'm going to use. I'm not going to choose any resource group underneath because I want the whole subscription can be used when I deploy any resources. So I have given a service connection as a name. And what it's going to do, it's going to create a service principal in my Azure Active Directory. So since I have got the owner permission, I'm able to do it. If you do not have the owner permissions in Azure, then you'll need to use the service principal option. That was the option I was talking about. You need to create it first and then use that one. So I'll save this, and this will make sure I have got a service connection, which means I have got a hook in between Azure DevOps and Azure portal. So this is how it's going to look like. And now what I'll do, I'll just go back to my pipeline. And as I was saying, I'm going to build my infrastructure. So to build my infrastructure, I will use my release pipeline. And with the release pipeline, I can deploy a new web app. So I'll create a new pipeline. And I'm going to start with the empty job. And I'm going to use my source code, which is the template. Basically, it's going to be used in order to deploy So I've used my default branch in Azure Repo, and I will configure the stage. The stage would be basically deploy the ARM template in Azure. So the step one, and I'm going to add the task in it. The task would be ARM template deployment. So I'll use this, and I will configure this task. Now, when I configure this task, I would need to use my service connection. In my case, I created a Azure Sydney reactor. So this is the service connection I'm going to use. And I can see the subscription. So there is one subscription underneath this service connection. If I want, I can manually add the service connection to multiple subscription, and then I would be able to choose any of those subscriptions. So I've only created the service connection to only one subscription, so I can only see that one. Now it says you can create or update the resource group. Now, in our case, we're going to create a new resource group. So the name of the resource group I've given is Sydney Reactor Demo, and I'll choose a location. I generally choose ECS2. The reason is sometimes my MVP subscription, it only allows me to deploy resources to a specific region. So since it's demo, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to use my template. So in my repo, I had uploaded my source code for my website, and I had also uploaded my JSON template to deploy web apps. So if you don't know what JSON template is, it's basically a template which is basically used in order to configure Azure infrastructure. So this is written in a JSON language. This is how it looks like. So what this template is doing, it's basically creating the Azure web app. It's choosing what app services plan I'm going to use. I've configured as an S1. I have hard coded my website name as well. But if you want, you can just make it more dynamic, and you can use variables and change it based on requirement. But in this case, I just wanted to keep it simple. I have given a name of my website. I have given the name of my app services plan, and that's good for me. So that's the template which I'm using. I'll click OK. If I want, I can use a template parameter file as well, which I'm not using in this case because I've got everything written in the template itself. Now, if I look at it, it's all good. I can save it, and I can create a release as well. Now, if I create a release, what it's gonna do, it's gonna deploy the web apps in Azure, because that's my first step. Because in order to deploy my website, I need a web app. And if I want, I can combine all these in a single, pipeline. But I just wanted to show you how do you deploy the, web app infrastructure first. So if I look at the pipeline, so what it is doing, it's downloading the artifacts, which means it's just downloading the ARM template. I can click on this one and see what are the steps it's gonna perform. Now, what it is doing here, because we are using Azure DevOps and we are using the cloud-based agent, so it's using one of the service, which is again free from Microsoft, using that machine to deploy these agents. So it's using that machine to deploy this JSON file in Azure. Now, if I want, I can go and look at my Azure. I'll just go select my subscription. Look at resource groups. You could see there is a new resource group which is created. And if I want to see, I can look at the current deployments which are going on. So you could see it's just deploying a website, and that deployment has kicked in like 55 seconds back, and it's currently deploying. So once it's deployed, I would be able to see it as a success. That means my website is deployed in my Azure subscription. So this is just an empty website, and then we will create another pipeline to create a build and release, which means we can deploy a website in this website or web app, I would say. So while deploying this web app, what I'll also do, I'll just quickly go on repos, and I will talk about Azure Repos a little bit more. So when we talk about Azure Repo, so as I said, it uses the Git as a source control, which means I can create different branches. So I uploaded everything to a master branch, but if required, I can even create different branches. So I can go on branches, and I can choose this branch. I can create child branch within this branch, or if I want, I can even create a branch policy. Now, if I'm doing it in a production, I would want to have a branch policy which can restrict anybody to deploy any code, or I would say anybody to update any code in the master branch. So I can deploy a policy. I can define at least minimum 2 reviewers should be there before the code can be merged with the master branch. And I can even add who should those reviewers needs to be. So I can add them as well. So since it's a very basic demo, I'm not doing it. But as a best practice, it's a good idea. There should be multiple branches which needs to be created, and people should need to make a pull request in order to merge their code or changes to the master branch. And there should be a set of reviewers who should look at the code and confirm if the code is good to go in the production environment. So I'll go in my pipeline, and I'll look at my pipeline and see if it is successful. Yes, it is. And if I go back here and look at my website, yes, I've got a website deployed. So this is my Azure web app. And if I want, I can go to this URL, and I can see our web app is deployed. So that's pretty good. Now, what I can also do is I can create a slot. So slot is a concept in Azure web app, which basically allows you to have multiple deployment slot, which means you can have a slot for your dev and test, and you can have your production slot as a separate one. And you can define how much traffic and load should go on your dev and test. So as a best practice, you may not want to update your website immediately. You may want to just check it whether the website is working fine in a dev and test environment. If all good, then only you update it in the production environment. So I'll create a deployment slot, which is going to be I'll just call it as a dev. I'm not going to clone it with my production slot, and I'll click add. It's creating the dev staging slot. And I'll use that dev staging slot in order to deploy my dev website. And then if I want, I can, if everything is fine, I can deploy the same website to the production as well. So now I will go back and I'll create my new set of pipelines, which are basically gonna build my website, and it's gonna deploy in dev as well as to the production web apps environment. So we have got infrastructure deployed. Now the next set of pipeline, which is basically my MVC code, which I'm going to use as my Azure Repos. But if you could see that I can use different repos as well. So as we talked about, Azure DevOps provides you multiple tools. If you do not want Azure Repos, and if you want to use GitHub or Bitbucket, you can choose different repos as well. But I'm going to stick to Azure Repo. So for that, I'm going to use the classic editor and choose the Azure Repo. I'm going to continue. Going to use the ASP.NET Core because that's the framework I've used for my demo website. And it has got a series of steps, gonna restore and build and publish the website. So I'm not using the test, and I'm gonna remove that task. So this is kind of a template. And after that, it's gonna publish the artifacts in the artifact staging directory. So that's pretty much it's gonna do, and it's gonna create a build for me. Now, what I can also do here is I can create triggers. So triggers means if anybody makes any changes in the code in on-prem, and they basically push the changes, and the moment they update the changes in the repo, it will automatically gonna create a build. So by default, it's a manual process if you don't check this box. Now I'm gonna use this, and if I want, I can filter any folders from the branches. I've got everything in the master branch, so I'm not filtering anything. Now with this, I'm gonna save in queue, which is pretty much gonna build my website. So I'll just save and run. And it's using the Ubuntu as my agent, which is fine because it's a .NET Core website, which can even be built on Ubuntu agent as well. So since it's a cloud hosted agent, it just queues up and it's gonna run whenever it finds the agent. So sometimes it's slow. If you want, you can also have your own hosted agents as well. If I want to see the progress, I can come here and I can see what it's doing. And yep, it has created an artifact. And that's pretty much like a website it has created. But I need to now configure this website to be deployed in my Azure environment, which I've just created. So for that, I'm going to create a release pipeline. So that's the continuous deployment part. So I've configured the continuous integration, and now I'm going to configure the continuous deployment. So I'll go on release pipeline, and I'm going to create another pipeline, which is basically going to deploy the Azure, web app. So I'll select this one and select my artifact. In this case, it's going to be from build, and I'm going to use my source code, which is my CI, and I'm going to use the latest version, click add. And now I'm going to create a series of steps. So you could see I've got a stage 1, and in my stage 1, I have got my web app, and this web app is going to be my dev web app. So I'm going to deploy this to a app services environment in a slot, and I can choose the resource group. So it's just making the request using the service connection, which I have built. And it's gonna show me the resource group. And once I see that, I can even select the slots. Yeah, so this is the part which takes a little bit of time. It refreshes and shows it. Just loading. There's a challenge with the live demos. It takes more time in live demos than the actual dry run. All looks good. In an ideal scenario, it should be showing the resource group, and it should also be showing me the deployment slot, which I've created. In my case, that's a dev slot. Since it's not giving any error message, it means it's just refreshing. And as I said, sometimes it takes a little bit of time, especially when you're doing the live demo. It takes more time.
We got a couple of questions about the demo Deepak. Someone's asked if it's stalling because some settings need attention.
Let me just quickly check.
And another person said the demo gods are not with us today.
Yeah, no, sometimes demo gods are a bit slow in their blessing.
Yeah, always happens. Always happens. It's all good.
If it doesn't work, I'll show you the another pipeline I have got in my environment, but that would kind of stop me to show you the CI/CD part. Yeah, so it's not giving any error message, which means Probably I'm gonna go back to release, leave it, and gonna refresh it. Sometime refresh helps. Gonna give it a try again. Otherwise, I'll show you how I have configured this pipeline in my another project. So maybe I'll create a new release pipeline. Take my artifacts from the build again. It all looks good. And if I okay, I'll just switch to my another demo environment, and I'll see how does it look like there. So I'll go on. So I've created a dry run demo, and within the dry run demo, it's a good thing I didn't delete that one because I created and deleted a few demos. If I go on my pipeline, and if I look at my release pipeline, so we've got a dev and production environment, which is deployed. So let's just edit this and see how does it look like. So here you could see I'm using the CI, which is the continuous integration for the build. And I've got a dev environment, which basically shows the resource group. That's what it should show. That's pretty much I have. And then it shows slot. It's just deploying in the staging slot. And I have another stage. So what I've done here is this is the another stage where I have got the manual intervention. So what I've done here is basically I deploy the website first in its deployment slot, and then somebody has to approve it to go it in the production environment. So that's why I've created the manual intervention. And yeah, so it just, though I'm deploying it in the same slots here by mistake, but you can just deploy not in the slot directly to the website. So I'll give it a try again and see how does it look like. Okay. Oh, pipeline in your region may be impacted by a live site incident. Looks like this issue is happening as we are delivering the demo. Looks like demo god is not with us. So one pipeline worked properly. Now I'll just try to create another pipeline. Yeah, so it's not giving any message. Just getting stuck at the loading. So it could be because of the issues. You can see here, the pipeline in your region may be impacted by the live site incident. So sorry about that. So yeah, I think just for the interest of time, I'll just go back on my another environment and you can see what I have done here. I'll just go back and show my release pipeline again. Now in this release pipeline, what I've done is I'm deploying it to the daemon stage environment. So if I edit this pipeline, you could see it's successfully deployed. The green checkbox means everything is successfully deployed. Now, if I edit this, now I've got a dev and production environment which I've configured. And basically, that's where I'm deploying my website. So it picks up the subscription, shows everything, which is not happening in the in my another environment. So I'll show you how this website looks like, and probably I'll modify this pipeline to kick on the CI and CD. Yep. So this is how my another website look like. So which I've created with my pipeline. So you can see it shows the welcome to DevOps demo. And what I can do in this pipeline, or what I have done in this pipeline, is configured the process, which basically allows a continuous deployment. So how do we do that? I'll just basically edit this and I'll show you. So this is the continuous deployment trigger, which basically allows any build, once it's completed, it just kick off the automatic deployment. So what it's going to do, it's basically deploy this dev environment. And after this dev environment, I have got the gates. Now this gate basically says, once my dev stage is completed, then only my production environment should be deployed. Now, for my production environment, what I've done is I have got a manual intervention, which means if I kick off this pipeline, it's basically would require approval first, and then only this pipeline will be deployed. So what I'll do, just for the interest of time, I will go back on a pipeline and I will, run the pipeline again. So this is my build pipeline, which means if any changes happen in the source code, it's gonna run the build again. And once the build is completed, it's gonna deploy the environment again. So I'm gonna run this pipeline and just gonna queue. Hopefully it works fine. Yep, so it's gonna run this build. Once this build is completed, it's gonna kick off the release pipeline because we already have configured the trigger that whenever a successful build is completed, it should run the release. So the build is getting completed. And once the build is completed, we'll look at the release pipeline because that should kickstart automatically. looks like it just completed. And if I look at my release pipeline, so it looks like the release pipeline is, yep, you could see the release pipeline is now running the moment the build is completed. Now, so it's going to perform this deployment into my deployment slot first, and then it's going to deploy it to the production. So now, interestingly, what I have done is the production is the manual one. So it will get, once it's completed, it'll stop here in the dev and it'll wait. And once I perform a manual intervention, which means I personally run it, then only it will get deployed in production. So if I wanted, I could remove the manual intervention and everything could happen automatically. So dev is done. You could see the production. And if you look at production, so it's asking the resume and reject. And I'm going to resume it. There's a manual intervention. It succeeded. And it's going to run the pipeline. So that means, I've configured my CI/CD, which means if anybody makes any changes in the code gets uploaded in Azure Repos, and then it kicks off the build. Once the build is successful, it kicks off the release pipeline, and release pipeline can be, can run based on the workflow I've defined. So in my case, it deploys the dev environment first, and for the production environment, it requires the manual intervention. Once somebody who you define who can perform the manual intervention, then only the production workload will be deployed. But if you want, you can just make it automatic end-to-end as well. But as a best practice, you would want to define the gates, and you would want, there are a series of people who look at the code and who look at the deployment first before it goes into production. So if I go back and look at my release, yeah, it shows the release is successful and it has deployed it from dev and then to the production environment. Yeah, so this was my demo environment I had configured. So luckily I could use it to show how it looks like.
Hi, Deepak. So I'm just going to quickly cut in here. We've got a question from someone. They just want to know that, is this the flow? So like board, pipelines, CI, release, and then pipeline CD?
Yes, so that's the flow. If you're building any software, you need to build it. But if you're deploying the infrastructure, I can directly use the release pipeline, which means I already have got a template ready and I can simply deploy it. So that's what I did it in my environment. I didn't use the build when I deployed the web app. But if you're building a website or a software, you'd always want to do a build. And that's where you can use the build pipeline. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Let us know if that answered the question for you.
Sure. Yep, so I'll just move on and I'll just talk about the Azure DevOps pricing. Now, for open source project, Azure DevOps is free, and for up to 5 users, Azure DevOps is free, and you can use the Azure Pipeline for the Microsoft hosted agent for 1,800 minutes per month. Every month it gets renewed again. So this is pretty good if you want to get started for a small environment. Up to 5 users free. You get the pipeline, boards, repos, artifact. But the moment you require the task plans, then you start using for the paid subscription. So for the task plan, you require the paid subscription. And I'll just open up the pricing and licensing page. Yeah, so that's much easier. So basic and task plan, that's where it costs $52 per user per month. But if you got up to 5 users and you don't need a task plan, it's free. But any additional user after the 5th user, it's going to be $6 per user per month. So it's pretty good. Like, you can start off free of cost. You can start using it. And if you want to use it for a bigger team, then only you start paying for it. Yep. So that's pretty much. So we've seen these Azure DevOps. You can use the tools which you need to deploy your environment or your software to any infrastructure. Now, in this demo, as I said, I used Azure, but if you have AWS and you want to use the pipeline and deploy anything on AWS, you can do it. You just need to make the service connection to the AWS instead of Azure, and that could be with the Google Cloud as well. Now, what next? If you want to play around with Azure DevOps, so there's a very good website, AzureDevOpsLabs.com. I was initially planning to use Azure DevOps Labs because they have got a lot of things already pre-configured, but I wanted to make this demo more like a interactive and from the scratch. That's why I changed my plan. So I'll just show you how does that look like. I created a demo generator from the DevOps demo generator lab, and you could see there are a series of demos which are created. I can go on Tailwind Traders, and they already have got boards which are created. Now, if you want to just play around with board and you don't want to start from the scratch, you can see it here, and you can just play around with it. So this is for demo environment. It's kind of a pre-configured labs. You can configure it in your DevOps environment and play around with it. Yep, and shows dashboards. You can just create wikis. Sorry, this one doesn't have a dashboard, but some of the labs have got dashboards as well as repos and pipelines as well. Yeah, you can follow the Twitter, which is the Azure DevOps, and you can look at the DevOps forum and DevOps blog as well. So that pretty much gives you a good idea about the tools which are available for Azure DevOps. Now, let me know if you have any question. I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. We've got a few questions that have come through during this session, Deepak. So I will read them out to you, but I'll just quickly share my screen for everyone. Cool. Okay, so one of the questions we have is, why do we need service connection?
Yeah, so the service connection is a way you're telling Azure DevOps to connect to a service. So just mind it, you may not have permission to your customers' Azure environment, but you might want to use your DevOps to deploy infrastructure in your customer's environment, and you would want them to create a service connection for you. And then you have a connectivity to their subscription. In my environment, I already had everything tied to my single Azure Active Directory, but that's not going to be case. That's not going to be true for each and every case. And second thing, if you want to connect to AWS, again, you need to create a service connection to AWS as well. And you can have multiple service connection. So you can even deploy your dev environment to a different subscription and your prod environment to a totally different subscription as well. I hope that answers your question.
Cool. The next one is, does this agent job incur charges on how many builds I can deploy?
So there is like 1,800 minutes free for the build agent. And after that, you need to wait or you need to start paying for it. So as I talked about, Azure DevOps is free for initial 5 users, and up to 1,800 agent minutes are free every month. But if you don't want to use your hosted agent, you can also use your own agents as well, which means you can deploy a VM, which can be used as agent to create a build for you.
Awesome. How can I deploy code to an app service environment?
How can I deploy code?
Yeah, how can I deploy code to an app service environment?
So we use the app services environment itself to deploy the website. If you have very specific questions, you could just need to explain it a little bit more.
Sure. Whoever asked that question, if you just want to elaborate a little bit more in the Q&A, and then we can come back to it. Another question we have is, how can I have a Docker build pipeline?
Yeah, so this kind of very basic session. So I have not covered the Docker build pipeline, but there are a series of steps probably I'll share, after this session, which you can follow to build, Docker build pipeline.
Awesome. Yeah, and there's a very similar one as well, the how to deploy .NET Core projects. So I don't know, Deepak, I think we may have to do a part 2 to this.
So I use the .NET Core itself. So I created a .NET Core MVC application. But yeah, I didn't show you from the beginning because it takes a little bit more time, and I just wanted to show more on the DevOps side. But I use the .NET Core app only.
Awesome. Another question as well. For source code management, secure code analysis, code quality analysis, etc., if an organization uses different tools, how would that be configured and integrated with Azure DevOps?
Yeah, so you can include the code quality tools in these Azure DevOps. So there is a marketplace and plugins which are available for DevOps, which can be used as well. So yes, you can use the Sonar Cube and different tools. There are integration possible with Azure DevOps.
Cool. Well, there's no more questions at the moment, so I think I'm just going to take everyone through a quick Reactor update. If you do think of something in the meantime, feel free to pop it in the Q&A and we will try to address it before we leave this evening. So thank you all again for joining us, and thank you so much, Deepak. Just first and foremost, if you want to know what else is coming on at the Reactor, feel free to follow us on meetup.com, Microsoft Reactor Sydney. We post a lot of different workshops and sessions that you can join, even some global ones as well from our other reactors and other locations. You can follow us on Twitter, and a lot of our recordings will also be on the YouTube channel. So a couple of people have asked if this will be recorded, and yes, it will be. It'll most likely be up tomorrow morning, so stay tuned. If you have any questions about the Reactor, you want to know what we're about, you want some more information, or you even want to get involved, feel free to email us at reactor@microsoft.com, or you can also find me on LinkedIn as well and reach out to me directly. My LinkedIn is Nadia Heta. I'll also pop that in the Q&A. So if you have any feedback on the session, I'll pop a survey link and the event code in the Q&A for you. This just gives us an indication of the content that you want to see. If you want to see a part 2, if you want to learn more about a particular topic, please let us know. We do ask that you put the event code in just so that we know which session this is tailored to. So up and coming next week, we've got some really great sessions kicking off. We have a lunchtime session next week on Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management. So this is going to be a very demo heavy session with Faisal, who is going to show us how to streamline integrations. We've also got another session that we're running again called Intro to Microsoft Learn How to Prepare for Certifications with an Expert. So this session is going to be run by Lisa Crosby. She's going to take you through what Microsoft Learn is and how to utilize that information to prepare for your certifications with Microsoft. So really great session. We had some really great questions last time, so feel free to join or let any colleagues or friends know if they are looking at getting certified. We have a new series that has kicked off at the Reactor called a Thought Leadership Series. Now, at the end of every month, we'll be tackling some topics with a panel of Microsoft regional directors. This month's topic, we're looking at how to remain relevant in a virtual world. So feel free to come with your questions, pick their brains about how to remain relevant, how to use your skills, how to even maybe upskill. So it'll be a really great session, and we'll be bringing the session back again in October. So I think we've got one more question that's come through for you, Deepak. They've asked, the app service environment is not accessible from external sites like Azure DevOps. What has to be allowed on the app service environment side?
Sorry, I was on mute. I think for app service environment, you've got a task you can configure. Yeah, if you have a very specific questions, you can follow up with me, and I can find you the answer for it. So you can connect me on my Twitter, which is IM_Deepak, and I will help finding out the answer for your question. But my understanding is there is a task you can configure when you configure the app services. So yeah.
Perfect. I will add Deepak's Twitter handle in the Q&A as well, so you can reach him after the session with your questions. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you again, Deepak, for taking the time to take us through the demos and introducing us to all Azure DevOps. And I want to say, for those, if you've logged in from Australia or anywhere in the APAC region, have a great night. And for those who are just starting their day, I really hope it goes well, and we will see you all again next time. Thank you. Until then, bye.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you. Bye-bye.